Hi, I'm Kristen Dahl. I'm a teacher in Anchorage, Alaska, and I've been teaching Spanish for over 2 decades. I have also taught French over the years, and I have been a reader for AP Lang um, for Spanish. And in my free time, I really enjoy hiking and enjoying the beautiful expanse Alaska has to offer to explore. Professionally, though, I am fascinated by learning how to help kids learn to speak and learn myself how our brains work when we acquire language, and to help kids find those same tools to increase their ability to use the language and learn the language and enjoy that as a tool and a source of joy in their lives. So today I'm going to talk about something that has not been a source of joy for me, and something that has not been so much uh, something that I hope to see persist. And my title is Authentic Language versus Artificial Intelligence: Helping Students Use Their Own Language Instead of Translators. The reason I decided to talk about this was because over and over again, I felt frustrated this spring when I would see kids turning in things that was obviously not their own work, clearly not at their proficiency level, often error free. And I didn't know how to respond to that. I didn't want to break the relationship with them. I do not like confronting them and accusing them of not doing their own work. At the same time, I found it hard to give them credit for work that was obviously not uh, related to the work I had seen them doing previously in class at a totally different level of ability. And so I talked to many teachers about this, and I imagine many of you experienced similar situations with your students. Um, it was an emergency situation, so I have faith that it will be different, or it can be different in the fall this year. This spring, I really had to refer to that prayer about serenity. Grant me the serenity to accept that which I cannot change, and the strength to change that which I can change, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this spring was all about that serenity and accepting, because there were so many things we couldn't change. There were so many losses. I felt waves of grief week after week. I lost our culture, our classroom culture, the expectations that we would see each other and interact with each other and dialogue with each other. And I would make the lessons based on the students' lives and their interests. And we would read novels independently regularly as a part of our class. And we would do so much in class that I just could not replicate via distant learning, especially in the sudden change that came about and all the limitations that we had this spring. I mourned the loss of the personal interaction with students, and the give and take and the feedback, if they're understanding. And I wasn't able to support them in a natural way like I do in the classroom, and that was very hard. And then the loss I want to address today was that expectation that they would attempt to communicate with words they knew, rather than they knew in their target language, rather than try to communicate with words they knew in their primary language, and use some machine-assisted technology to help them bridge the gap in between those two levels. And what I was seeing, I'm sure many of you saw similar things, so I won't give you examples, but a Spanish 2 assignment describing, say, their childhood with, giving some scaffolding, some introduction, some background work on that. And then they would go to write or speak about that. And their work would be suddenly 100% correct with complex sentences, using indirect object pronouns in a way that they're not usually used in English, the personal A popping up right and left, idiomatic turns of phrases, vocabulary that was just so eloquent, and tenses that we have rarely, if ever, seen in class. And I was so impressed at their progress, I couldn't believe it. Yeah, not exactly. I had to write over and over again something along the lines of, please avoid translators by using only Spanish words you know, which is not to say that I didn't want them to, I didn't allow a little bit of use of looking for a word that was pertinent and helpful, but I really wanted to see what they could use with the language that they already owned and work from there. And I wasn't getting that. And it was really hard to see that over and over and over again throughout the semester. But the good news is that spring was a survival mode, and all that serenity that we had to deal with this spring, we now have a chance. It's summer and we have a chance to recover. And please recover. Take some time for yourselves. And we have a chance to regroup and to process things a little bit, and then to think about what we can do to change the situation. We don't know. We have this uncertainty still. That's something we cannot change. So we don't know exactly what our fall teaching situation will look like, whether it will be online, hybrid, in person, and what that would look like if we are in person, how that will be different. But we do have the time to think about how to structure things, to have a different culture for our learning that will help students meet the demands of online learning should that occur, and also understand how to use artificial intelligence to translate when it's helpful, but not rely on it as a crutch that will limit their ability to grow and to develop with their linguistic proficiency in their second language. So we have this time to plan and change now, and that's what this presentation is about. Because whether we like it or not, those translators are everywhere. They're ubiquitous and they're here to stay. And I am coming into this world fighting and kicking because I don't want translators in my classroom. I like that it's a zone where we can just work with our brains. We do use technology, but we avoid translators and that technology as much as possible and work with what we have at our fingertips. But I think this year I will do it differently. And these are some of the reasons. How do we encourage students to communicate with their authentic voices in this digital age when they can so easily communicate with the use of AI? And there's several parts of this. A big part of the answer lies in teaching kids how to confidently communicate at their current proficiency level, and then showing them the steps they can take to grow towards the next level so they feel progress, they feel success, and they don't feel defeated by the errors or their inability to communicate what they want to at their level. What are some of the reasons students use translators? A few reasons that kids don't trust their own voice and instead resort to AI are that they're frustrated. They're trying to communicate at the level they can in their first language. And in the TL, they cannot do that yet and maybe never. And so we need to help them understand that they can be successful communicating at a simpler level. I think it's very helpful to explicitly teach some skills such as circumlocution so they can communicate their ideas in simpler language instead of resorting to a translator or a dictionary to find so many words that they can't come up with. How could they communicate that idea with words they do know? And another problem can be that the task expectations that we set up as teachers may imply that they should communicate at a higher level of proficiency in the student's mind, even if we didn't intend that, or they may explicitly ask for a higher level of proficiency, and we need to be aware of that and target our tasks to their level. Also, they may lack scaffolding in class. We're there to offer input, lots of input, and set them up to use all these words that are bouncing around in their head before they create. And online, at least the way our school was, it was so limited. We had very little ability to give kids input to kind of get the Spanish percolating in their brains. On top of that, we weren't there to help support them and to model what a typical answer at their level might be. And we weren't there to help support them when they had questions or when they had uncertainties. And some of them were brave enough to email me during COVID, but many did not. And so I found myself adding more and more scaffolding to the tasks, both implicit and explicit. And I think that helped them, these open-ended tasks, which are more meaningful and more personalized, it helped them be less linguistically overwhelming for many students. And the third reason is AI is everywhere and it's free. It is often hard to avoid. It's harder to avoid than to just accept it and use it. And so that is a reality that I must have the serenity to accept and then see where we move forward from that. Strategies to support authentic communication. We need to use some proficiency-based tools to help our students be more authentic with their communication and take those risks. And so that means educating students about where they are now and how they can focus their efforts to grow towards that next level. So where are they now? Our school has a proficiency test every year. We're lucky. And so we use that to help show kids where exactly on this path. There are many graphics like this that are a visual representation of the levels. And this one I really like because it has short descriptors of the text types that are common to each level. And so we can say, oh, look, your test last year showed you were here. So this is what you're good at. Keep working on that and then work on building this next level where you're always using discrete sentences and not fragments so much. But you could also be within the test. You could say, oh, on this assignment, you really reached this discrete sentence level. You did a great job of that. And so your next stage for your next assignment, see if you can start stringing your sentences together, little clumps of sentences on the same topic a little bit more. Expand that topic with more sentences. And so it gives some feedback for the kids and some focus where they are and where to go. Another thing I would recommend doing at the beginning of the year is really helping students understand what it means to communicate at each level. And this is a great tool that I found online where you can creative language class and you can cut out a tag, a little descriptor tag for each group of students, put students in small groups, maybe make 2 sets of them if you have a large class. And this is a descriptor for novice low, novice mid text type, novice high, intermediate low text, intermediate mid, and intermediate high. And then you give the kids a prompt topic. It could be, describe tacos or crepes, or you could say, you have a friend that's visiting, an exchange student that's visiting you, and he's wondering what there is to do here on weekends that is interesting. And so whatever prompt you choose, each group would write down an example of that on a poster board and then present that to the class. And the class would see the difference between those different levels of text. And you could post those on your walls as a model and a reminder for kids of where they are now and where they can move to. And it helps them with goal setting, which is also very important for motivational purposes. We need to model, give them models of how to communicate with what they know in L2 rather than trying to communicate at their L1 proficiency levels. You can give them a model of an assignment that they're about to do so they can see what that might look like. You can also model in class as part of the lesson. I think this is very effective, and it's a new strategy I picked up from Tina Hardigan and called Write and Discuss. But before we get to that, some things that are important is when you're teaching in class, focus on that message. Don't focus so much on the text type while you're teaching or on the grammar, or communicate with those kids and limit your vocabulary. Some textbooks give 50 words of vocabulary per week, and it's overwhelming and the kids can't keep up with that. And some of it really isn't very high frequency vocabulary. So it's not as useful as some other words in the broader scheme of things. So if you limit your vocabulary to high frequency, useful vocabulary that's interesting and pertinent to the kids, and then personalize the message, talk about the kids or relate whatever you're talking about. Let's say your lesson is about a video, or you have a text you're reading with the kids, or you're discussing an infographic. Well, tie that into those kids' lives and compare the information in the text or the video to the kids' lives, or ask for their opinions, or do a survey on the class related to that, or work some of the vocabulary in the video into personalized questions for the students. So now you have some information that you've created in the class. And the next step is to review it. What did you just talk about? Go over that with the kids, maybe ask them some true or false questions, or ask them some informational questions about what you discussed in class. And then the next stage is to write about it. And so as a class, using an overhead projector or the whiteboard or overhead projectors, I meant a document camera. Some of you still use those. I have one, but I haven't used it in years. A document camera, or you could type directly onto a computer and project it. But you're going to be writing a text together about what you just discussed, whatever the content was, that message that you had. And you're going to write about it and somehow analyze that content and pick out some important information from it, and then present that in the written text. So here's a simple one from Spanish 2. We had talked on in class that day, it was a Monday, about the weekend activities as well as plans kids had for that next day or two. And so our first sentences was pretty simple. The topic sentence is, today we talked about the weekend and our plans for today. Easy enough. And then we see an organizer with some sequencing words. So first we talked to Adam, and he told us what he did over the weekend. Also, another sequencing word, Grace. We talked to Grace, and she said that she's going to read today. So that gives us a little bit of a prediction of what she's planning to do. But some extra information is that she didn't know what book she was going to read. And finally, another sequencing word, Sean told us that he doesn't know what he's going to do today. And then we ended up with, kids thought that was kind of funny. And so we said, oh, how strange. That's a word they know. We teach some reaction words in class. And so that was a way of having a little concluding emotional reaction to the content of that paragraph. And that is a model, a very simple model, but you can do more academic versions of a write and discuss, where you have now discussed what you talked about, you wrote about it, and the kids see that model. You do that together with the kids and giving them options. Should we say finally, or last of all? Should we say también, or should we say next? And what did Grace tell us? Oh, okay, what's the most important idea? Okay, let's put that in there. How are we going to say that now? And kind of help kids write it, be a model for writing academically with the students. And that's part of this power of the write and discuss. It models how to communicate with the words they know and the language they know at their L2 level, at least that of the class, although kids within the class will have different levels. And it allows you to add in some academic vocabulary, some sentence frames, and some structure that they might not be proficient with yet, but that will help them move up to the next proficiency level over time. Another strategy is to remind students explicitly or implicitly of language that they have been exposed to so far, and encourage them to demonstrate that they can stick to those tools to communicate instead of reaching out for tools they don't have yet. So kids will often ask me how to say some beautiful word, and I'll say, well, what's the easier way to say that? And in levels 1 and 2, often that goes back to the Super 7 words. And so these, if you haven't heard of the Super 7, you might look them up, but they're just some core words in any language that you need a word for these type of ideas. And when you have a word for those and know them well, you can tell just about any story and get your point across in any situation in a very simple way. And so the first 2 years are about, in my classes, are about really understanding those words and using them, having kids use them effectively. Implicitly would be to have some content that has some words that are understandable and relevant to the task. And that content would be a model, and they could draw words from that content to use, or be reminded of words they see in that content. Here's some videos, or it could be an infographic or a text of some sort. And then you could also use that to make a comparison with their own culture. So they see what's in that video or that text, and they compare it to their own lives or something that they know about. Another strategy is to scaffold, and we even more than we just saw before, other ways to scaffold our communicative tasks are to post some question words that kids should think about answering when they complete their answers, so they don't just say, oh, I like to ski, but I like to ski in the winter after school and on weekends. It's one of my favorite activities. I usually ski in Alyeska with my friends, and we like to go way up to the top and ski down the diamond runs. And you're answering these when, where, with who, and you're getting some multi-part sentences that have more details embedded in the sentence, and that's a sign of a higher level of proficiency. And that's the kind of coaching I would be giving to students that are at the novice high or intermediate low level particularly. You could have sentence frames like, I think that, or I agree up to a point, but, or I'm not sure, but I suppose, and these are just ways of giving a frame for them to put their own ideas successfully, but using simpler vocabulary overall. But it feels more academic and it feels more at their intellectual level. Another tool that's very helpful is a graphic organizer that helps them organize their ideas into a paragraph. And so at the intermediate level, our kids were trying to help them move from discrete sentences to strings of sentences that are on the same topic and loosely related, but you could put them in any order and it wouldn't really change that paragraph, so to speak. And to have a true paragraph, you're going to have an introduction, a topic sentence, and a body, and an end, and you can't move the sentences around very much because they fit into that sentence, into that paragraph in a certain place, in a certain way to build that idea together. And so a graphic organizer like this, which is also from Tina Hargaden, is super helpful to give to kids as they're about to do a task so they can practice or have some support going using the words they know, but moving it to a higher level. Another really, really powerful tool are rubrics, can-do statements. These paths to proficiency graphics, I love these. I have them copied and I put them in kids' portfolios so they can mark where they are now and where they're going, what their next goal is. I like these because they have a very, very short descriptor of the text type at that level. And so they can see, oh, I always use discrete sentences when required. And that could be on a specific task, or we have a proficiency assessment every year that all our kids do, so we know where they were last year, at least in February of the previous year. And so we can say, this is where you tested last year. So you want to make sure that's solid and then work on this next one. And as you move through the year, you could possibly move on the next two. You don't know. And some tasks you might even move 3 levels up, but this is where we really want to get this baseline and get these things solid right here. But this is very vague, and if you want something more specific, there's other tools. For example, I really love what we're seeing a lot of more of these level up kind of visuals now, where they describe with more detail what a novice mid is. And you also have the novice high descriptor with more detail, but in between they say, oh, to move to novice high, why don't you practice asking more questions on more topics and combine your words and phrases into simple sentences. And so the idea of creating sentences is very important to move to the novice high level, and that's some nice advice. And the Continua is the last thing from Tina Hargaden that I've been fascinated by to help personalize and individualize feedback kids get and their goal setting. I've been using it primarily with my advanced classes, where I have kids in one class, I'll have kids at, say, the novice performing consistently at the novice high level, as well as kids that are all the way up to advanced in that same class. And it's very hard to meet all those kids' needs and give the kids the same targets and figure out how to assess their progress when there's such a diversity of abilities within the class. And a Continua not only has these levels of proficiency that we see here, but on top of it, it breaks each level into micro levels of proficiency, and it targets it to the ones I've seen are targeted to a certain type of discourse, like narrative continua. And so there'd be, like, for, say, intermediate low, there'd be intermediate low A, and intermediate low B, and intermediate low C, and intermediate low D, and they're progressive stages. And so if a kid demonstrates that they were able to successfully communicate at intermediate low A, then their goal, they can tell for the next one, is to communicate at intermediate low B. And there's some specific guidelines, like, oh, you need to start putting some strings of sentences together in your next one, because you really just have random sentences and you're not developing them enough. So you need more sentences on one topic at a time before you move to the next topic. And so when they do that, then you can say, oh, great, now you're getting some strings of sentences. The next stage is to add more detail to those sentences and make those sentences longer, for example. And so it's a way for students to have more independence. And also it's an excellent tool to keep them away from Google Translate, because this is giving them guidelines to work with the language they know. And it's very specific on what they need to do to get to that next level. And it helps them self-assess, helps them set goals, and helps them move feel some progress along the path of proficiency. Finally, it's important to inspire and call on students to honor the integrity of the learning process. And so we inspire them by giving them personalized and compelling assignments, open-ended assignments that are interesting to them, and also by offering grading that honors the process and growth over perfection. We don't dock them for every error, because if they're growing, there's going to be a lot of errors, at least until they're solid intermediate mid, and that's when they start to disappear. And so we need to honor their process of growth and give them credit for making the effort and for following the self-assessing and for seeing where they need to go next and moving up to that next level and demonstrating that they can now perform or at some point engage at that next level of proficiency, and honor that. We can use student portfolios to give them that evidence. And then we also need to educate them on what it means to learn with integrity, because we can't coach them. And I think of my coach more and more and less as a teacher. If their work is perfect, or if it doesn't reflect their own level of ability, there's no feedback I can give them. And I don't have a job anymore at that point, other than to encourage them to learn with more integrity and to be clear about the expectations. Some schools have an integrity agreement that kids sign. I don't know if that's necessary. It can be helpful, but what is necessary is that they have clear expectations, which is what these levels of proficiency descriptors help to give them. So that's the main point of my lesson. I'm going to zoom through a few things, and I don't have enough time to give all the details, but I did do some research on what are these tools we have now for Google Translate today. And did you know that you can translate up to 5,000 words at one time? So you could copy a 20-page term paper, put it into Google Translate, and in one touch of the button, have it in another language. You can record your voice if you don't like to type, and you can type in the URL of any page, and more often than not, you can get the page translated into whatever language you wish. I was surprised to see it's looking a little bit more like a dictionary now. If you type in a single word, it'll give you definitions. It'll use it in sentences. So that's kind of exciting. What I did not realize is it will translate whole documents. So if you upload a PDF or a PowerPoint to your LMS for your students, and they're like, score, I have a digital document, put it into Google Translate, and a second later, they'll have that document in English to work with. They can write their answers in English and pop that back into Google Translate to submit to you. And so think about that. Part of our job now as teachers is to be cognizant of this and think about what that means. How does that inform the tasks we create and how we in those today? Also, there's the app on the phones, and one powerful part of that app is the camera that you can point at a book or at a web page that you couldn't translate. And with the camera hovering over it, you don't even need to take a picture. You can read it. It's like a document camera that magically translates all the words to the language you prefer. So here's a novel that we read in class, and they could read the whole thing in English if they have their phone handy. In conclusion, there's a few questions that we should ask as educators. We should inform ourselves on what tools are out there, and then we should ask, in class, how do we deal with that? How do we address it? How do we foster authentic communication? How do we teach kids to set goals and have level-appropriate expectations? How do we dialogue with students about the ways AI can help them in their learning and the ways AI can stunt their growth and keep them from entering that world of communication in another language? And finally, how can we change our tasks as teachers, the tasks we create, and how can we change as teachers the way we interact with our students to reflect this reality? Thanks a lot for attending today. I hope this was offered some insight to enter the next year with a positive mindset and some tools. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know at doll_Kristen@asdk12.org. I'd love to hear from you. And I hope you have a relaxing time, at least for a few weeks this summer, and get refueled and grounded for a new school year with a new foundation that you can set for your kids so they can be successful in our new digital age.